Okay. So I'm introducing Surya Kumar Mahapatra. He is the global head for Global Talent Transformation Digital Operation, Wipro. He is heading for 60,000 employees altogether, more than 20 plus years of experience. He also heads an informal community of L&D Global. He is the avid follower of Sri Sri Thakur and Nukul Chandra. And
7, that was close to the date. That's 7 points. So anything more relevant that they missed out? Love to share? Okay, thank you. Please come.
Is, as we are talking about, as we are discussing gamification, we are also experiencing it. So that's the beauty of this session. And we are going to experience gamification throughout as we progress. So I'm going to be the moderator of this panel discussion today, and then we have got a highly esteemed, intelligent, knowledgeable panelists bringing wealth of experience in this subject in their respective organizations. So there's a wealth of knowledge sitting here, and we'll be listening to them. We'll begin in the next couple of minutes. But before we start, I wanted to kind of give a slight context to the whole topic. I'm sure all of you have traveled across different parts of the country and maybe across the globe as well. And whenever you fly in an aircraft, and sometimes you might have been seated next to an emergency exit. Is it correct? Yes. Right. So when you sit next to an emergency exit, the air hostess comes to you and explains to you how to operate the emergency exit at the time of need, or when there is an emergency, how can you operate it? And she comes, she spends a couple of minutes, explains how to do it. Please tell me honestly, how many of you can really operate the emergency exit at the time of need? In an audience of about 60 or 70 professionals sitting out here, just 2 hands went up. But what's wrong with the air hostess? She does her best. She explains with great honesty how to operate the emergency exit. But why can't we operate it when we have to?
We feel the information is not coming at that time.
We feel that, okay.
At that time, I am not in that frame of mind to, understand that. And probably, when I'm sitting there and she says that, in case of emergency, I'll get, rather other thoughts.
So I'm not in the right frame of mind.
Yeah.
I may have other thoughts. What else? Yes, the gentleman there.
And all the explanation that is done on the...
So you were not calm at that point in time?
Yeah, so when the real emergency comes, you really don't think on, okay, how do I operate all that? You're trying to look at to save yourselves.
Okay.
And that emergency time, it may not flash on your mind.
Got it. One last perspective before we move on. Yes, the gentleman. Okay.
Well, this is a problem that most of us face. Learning generally happens at the hour of need, not before that, or not anywhere. You can't
Learning
really plan
happens.
it.
Okay.
Though you plan it, it only happens at that.
Only
moment.
when you need.
Yeah.
Okay. So there are different perspectives coming here. Well, I'm not in the right frame of mind. But research has proved that people learn when they want to learn. If they don't want to, they won't learn, no matter what we do. So now the question is, how do we make people want to learn? We can always say that, well, I'm doing my best, but people don't want to learn. But as a practitioner, as a trainer, as an L&D professional, what do I do to make people want to learn? So this takes us back to the concepts of neuroscience, and this requires us to go deep into that subject and understand how and why people learn. How can we create that motivation in people to learn? That's important. What chemicals are released in the brain which is enough motivation for people to get into action? How can we make that happen? So while traditionally trainers believe that it is important to do a good job of training, if you get a good score, feedback score, that's good enough. But I think the industry is shifting from that thought process. It's all about effectiveness. It's all about transfer of learning to the individuals. It's all about change in behaviors. So the shift has happened. When Toyota, when they launched their training program, they made it very clear. They said if the student hasn't learned, the trainer hasn't taught. It's as simple as that. We always say that students are not, they do not have the learning appetite, they're not trainable and so on. But they shifted the whole paradigm and they said if the student hasn't learned, you haven't taught. So the responsibility shifted towards the trainer, towards the facilitator, towards the practitioner. So from that, so that's the genesis where the whole concept, whole efforts towards gamification began. Gamification is about getting people, making people want to learn, get them to enjoy learning, get them to experience learning. So that's what gamification is all about. So we have three great panelists here, and the way we will kind of conduct the proceedings from now on, I would request each one of them to spend about 5 to 6 minutes talking about their experience with gamification, their experience, their strategy in their organization, what has been the journey of gamification in their organization, share their perspective in a nutshell, then we'll engage in a dialogue, and at some point in time we'll open up for discussion, for questions from the audience. So Dinesh, I would like to kind of request you to get started.
Yeah, sure. Good evening to all. Can you hear me? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So actually it has been a very interesting journey, and you all know we all go through a lot of stress, and then when we spend 4 hours on the road and 8 hours in office, learning sometimes always takes a backseat. But in today's era, I think learning is no more an optional luxury. It is a need of the hour. Otherwise, you become irrelevant very quickly. So therefore, so we started our journey seeing how do we address this problem actually, because teams now cannot sit in classroom sessions for 8 days, 5 days, 4 days, even 1 day for that matter. It's becoming very impractical. And then when somebody needs it very badly, then asking him to sit in a classroom really doesn't work to set up the whole logistics also. So therefore, we were actually trying to transform our learning to digital. And that's where we realized that this is really going to solve our problem of giving learning just in time, or giving the learning which is required. So probably he doesn't have to sit through the entire 8 hours or 16 hours, but he may only need 4 hours of whatever has been taught in 16 hours. So we thought digital learning is the best way of overcoming these problems which we had. But when we went through the digital learning, we had another experience. When you leave it to self-paced, self-driven, then you know all our mindsets, right? And we have been used to that. So we saw that there was no, we saw around 2 to 3% people were able to complete the courses. And then we noticed that probably a 40-hour course, they took 6 months. So we could realize how effective probably that would have been. Learning 40 hours over 6 months, hardly you would have remembered anything out of it. So these were some challenges we were facing when we started transforming to digital. So then we had to somehow again overcome this problem, and this is where we just thought about how we can use gamification to come over this problem. So what basically gamification was meant was to create some sense of timeness to complete the courses. So initially we started off in a very a preliminary way, just to track the progress. Like once we start assigning them courses and then giving them some badges, some leaderboards, all these typical style we started. Definitely we saw good, at least we saw a change in course completion. We could move to 25%. But again, that is not sufficient. When we are spending a huge amount of dollars on all these courses, we assign around 5,000, 6,000 licenses, and finally we end up with 25% completing the courses. It's still not a value proposition for us. So then we started looking at, okay, what is that we may have to do differently, but we definitely realized that gamification is one piece along with digital learning which has to go hand in hand to make it effective, but that is still not sufficient. So we have to still mature there. So then we started looking at, of course, we knew about these segments of killers, achievers, but unfortunately, when it comes to learning, the course is designed for a particular segment of participants based on his level of knowledge. So not on his style of learning or his natural traits, right? So definitely in a batch, we will always have a mix of all types of people. There may be some killers, there may be achievers, there may be socialites. So we cannot have multiple variants in that. So, but generally the course gets designed for a particular level. I think most of you might have used a lot of digital platforms. So we always see those categories: beginners, capable, expert, right? So now, so therefore we started looking at how do we look at this piece and design our gamification around that. So then we realized that was one piece of segmentation. And then the other piece of segmentation was, again, when it comes to the organization hierarchy, we saw different behaviors in individual contributors, millennials, digital natives, digital immigrants. So there was again a lot of behavioral change here. So again, we have to manage this piece. And we also tried out, in fact, the biggest task we have been having all these days, and in fact we still continue to have, is how do we get the leaders also learn new things? Because it's very important that leaders also keep themselves up to date on what is happening, and particularly when it comes to technology. And being a technology center for Global Honeywell, even leaders have a big contribution to do and need to be up to date on new things happening. So we did experiment gamification with leaders, which miserably failed. So like this, we went through a different journey, and then we have now at least come up with a strategy on how to address the individual contributors. So when I say individual contributors, I mean the developers. So there we started off with, of course, we had this standard leaderboard and badges, but what we did was we all put them together in a team site, and then we started assigning courses in the team site. We found that when we actually sent the scorecards to the larger group, somehow it was not received well, particularly with the people who did not do well in that. So we saw that only the people who have been doing good continued to do good, and the rest just left. They almost became dormant. So we thought somehow it's not really helping to motivate here, it is actually putting them down. So therefore we stopped publishing all this, but we actually put the data in the team site where when we assign them a course, when they get in there, they get to see it. So it's privately seen, but did not create that impact of negativity when we send it across to the over emails. So this is where we saw, definitely we saw a good improvement there. And then we actually wanted to see, so this here in this case, we could do that for longer programs. But when it comes to senior level employees, some leaders and who are pretty busy and don't get time to even do 40 hours of a course or even 20 hours of a course. So there we actually tried micro-learning. So a combination of micro-learning and gamification has helped us to, I would not say we have still hit the bullseye, but definitely we have seen better, at least 50% result change when we tried micro-learning with gamification. So this has been the journey, and this has been the trigger or need for gamification. So it's more than interactive. We wanted to use this as a leverage for engaging and ensuring that people go through these online courses in the right time and get the value out of it. So that has been a journey so far, but of course I know we have still a long way to go, and our end state is somewhere we have to almost come out of the classroom. It's not that classrooms are bad, but it doesn't serve the purpose today. And I think most of us reiterated here that we learn only when we need, and digital platform really enables that learning when you need it. So that has been a journey in brief.
Thank you, Dinesh. I think it has been a great journey, and it has been filled with experiments. So you have tried something, and then you have tried to find out what's working, what's not working, and then keep improving on that. And it's also interesting to see that today you are looking at a combination of micro-learning and gamification as a strategy. and your strategy is largely to drive engagement.
Yes.
So thank you, Dinesh. We'll come back to you again with more questions. Deepa, would you like to share your perspective?
Yes. So I would like to, ask you a question. How many of you have seen Ready Player One, a Steven Spielberg movie, which was purely on gaming? Anybody saw that? Yeah. So the interesting thing about this movie is that, and the organization that actually believes in thinking far ahead and try and experiment with new things. So the game will be a big business in the future. Okay, and that's what that movie talks about, right? So why, while that is the future, we need to prepare ourselves for that future, because in the coming years, by 2025, there's a statement that many occasion about 4 years ago, where we started in the space that I come from, behavioral and leadership learning. There's a lot of knowledge that was getting disseminated in freely. The YouTube channels were catching up. So if you just Google today about how to make a presentation, you get 100 videos on how to make a presentation. So it was not at all about knowing, anymore. It was about how do I do it, right? So that gap of knowing to doing, it was happening in the classroom. So then there was another challenge, how do I get people come into the classroom, right? So that was changing. People were, assuming that they know already. But when you actually come in front of the audience and stand, you will actually struggle to make the presentation because you have actually not done it in practical, right? So the whole gamification thought process started in the learning industry because they wanted to simulate the experience for the learner, right? So you be at your place, but try out, like how you go for your driving license, and the first thing you do is you actually do a simulation drive, right? Before you come onto the road and drive the car and get your license, you do it on the simulation thing. So it started with that thought process that we have to simulate experiences for learners who are not coming into classroom, but let them be wherever they are, but we have the technology capability to simulate that experience for them, okay? And that's how the whole gamification interactive learning started in the country. And while this gamification, they are experimenting a lot with AR and VR. Okay, so if you look at Google Expedition, these are the things that will happen in future, and through that the experience levels will get elevated. Leaderboards will make sense, but beyond leaderboards, the levels, the complexity, the complexity that is thrown at you to achieve things, that will catch up a lot in the learning space. And if we are serious about the learning business, I think this is what we need to think about, how do I leverage the latest technologies, that is catching up, and put it into my learning business, and I think somewhere India has a lot to do, catch up to do. We still have some way, distance to cover, but if at all we are serious about, simulation learning, gamification of learning, I think we also as learning professionals need to be updated with what is happening in technology space and how is it going to disrupt our space, right? So tomorrow they may actually come up with a bot who will come and do facilitation of a program and gamify the whole thing, and you and I would be out of business. So let's think future, let's think ahead.
So Nikhil, it's not enough if you just run around, because the bot can replace you anytime. I'm not seeing him. So, but Deepa was brilliant in saying that knowing is not enough, it's about doing now. And she talked about how to really get people to the classroom, get people to learning, how do you get them enjoy that experience. And she also talked about the trends, how the technologies are changing, how AR and VR is disrupting this space, and talked about other latest technologies, how they can, they're getting deployed. So we'll move on. Rajesh, so will you share your perspective on this topic?
Sure, thank you. Good evening. I represent a company called Cypress Semiconductors, and the company has been known for its hardcore culture. One of the cultural segment of which almost defines the core of our organization is that we tell the bad news first and good news later. And I have to tell you the bad news first. Bad news is that we probably live in highly disengaged society. There are zombies, there are vampires, and there are spark plugs. When I say zombies, these are almost 60% of people in any given organization. It's proven. You go to Gallup's, or you go to Waltz, you go to Wetfeet, you go to Center for Creative Leadership. I think the variation could be in the range of 2%, 5%, but the numbers that I'm telling are almost true. 60% of zombies who go through regular motions. They come into the office, they do their work, but it's very difficult for them to be engaged and motivated. And then you have vampires who are consistently bitching. These are the ones that you generally tend to meet on the hallway. This company, not going anywhere, These are the people. But there are 15, 12% of people who are spark plugs. These are the people who ignite others, who drive a lot of energy while they also ooze out a lot of energy. These are the people who can provoke others to perform. Why I'm telling you this bad news is to tell you that you have to deal with these set of people as much as we have to deal with them. Since we are HR practitioners, it's very difficult to move people who are towards the extreme left, towards the extreme right. Extreme left are your zombies, middle ones are your, extreme left are your vampires, middle ones are your zombies. To move these zombies towards spark plugs requires tremendous amount of efforts, and the rudimentary ways of provoking them, I think, are way too inadequate. That's the bad news. One more bad news. I think the attention span of an adult is ridiculously low. A college student tends to lose his or her attention span every 20 minutes, and if you are not holding him or her for the first 8 to 12 seconds, at a snap of finger, you lose. The latest research says that it is reduced to almost like a goldfish attention span, and you know what it is? 5 seconds. So probably, if I am dealing with millennials here, which I am sure I am, every 5 seconds, 8 seconds, you are losing us. That's bad news number 2. Bad news number 3. If we have to get your mobile screens or your touch screens or your desktop screens to be the screens of consumption of the content, which you generally tend to touch, how many times can you imagine? On an average, worldwide, a person touches his screen. Hold on to your imaginations, which are going to be wild now, 2,160 times a day. Are you kidding me? Is it good or bad, ladies and gentlemen? It's bad, but that's where the good news lies. Because if your screen becomes the interface to create the content creation, content consumption, is it not an opportunity? That's where my esteemed colleagues talk about gamification, that how do we use that as an interface to keep our folks engaged and start taking meaningful initiatives to move people from the extreme left quadrant to the extreme right. Not easy. That's where gamification becomes a mechanism to incentivize the changes in the behavior. We at Cypress have undertaken this Herculean task 8 years before, because we were onboarding quite a few new college grads, and you know how millennials think. They have enormous amount of energy, and if they are not engaged, they make no mistake to waste it, and they want to invest it elsewhere. And when we figured out that it's very difficult to onboard them with focused energy, we realized the best way to teach them about the organization, the culture, the values, the mission, vision, and their portfolio, and how their strategic roadmap looks ahead, the only option, ladies and gentlemen, ahead of us was to make them experience the life in the corporation by actually feeling it, pulsing it, living it. The only option ahead of us was to make them feel, make them experience, and we did that. I don't think gamification can be a universal phenomenon across the organization. I think one of my esteemed colleagues talked about it. I think you select your segments and then ask yourself as to why you want to gamify and who are going to be your customers. The moment when you decide, when you know, when you ascertain, I think your strategy changes. For example, year before, I launched a manager development program for all the managers around the company. I have around 16 major sites and around 27 others around the world. And I wanted to make sure that I have a unique program that gives them tools and techniques to grow themselves. And it wouldn't have been possible if there was no corporate mandate. It was very important for us to have that first. And once I had that, I realized all that I need to do is create an immersive technique, immersive platform where I use storytelling technique, gamification. I would use case studies, role plays. I will also create metrics to make sure that I'm measuring the performance and instinctively create a spirit of competitiveness to show who are the laggards, who are the fame of hall kind of people, who are the ones who are actually moving the needle, who are taking special interest to learn themselves. And as we started using platforms like MS Teams to create an active environment, we also bought special licenses from Skillsoft. I'm unsure if you're already using Skillsoft, please ask for Percipio, which is nothing but Netflix of learning. You want to learn, you have options right from multimodal aspects of learning through reading, listening, watching, and also listening to the podcast to actually customizing your own programs. So you really don't need to invest. All you probably need to do is identify who are your target audience and make a measurement of the number of licenses that probably you need to buy. And once you have a clear estimate, I believe you would make the best use of these tools and techniques. So in a nutshell, I think the investment that we did currently is producing the desired behavior, enabling the organization to solve the problems. After all, we're an engineering organization and our major business is solving the problems. I think gamification has helped us achieve that mode.
Excellent. Rajesh, you started with the current realities. Talked about the zombies and the vampires and the sparklers, kind of educated us about the current reality, about the disengaged society that we are. I think an interesting takeaway from what Rajesh talked about is, there is no one size fits all. There is no one strategy that is applicable to everybody. And what I liked about his sharing was combining gamification with other strategies like storytelling, podcast, other host of other strategies, collaborative learning, etc., really makes it effective. So now taking this discussion forward, Deepa talked about a lot of new technologies. Dinesh talked about how they're combining micro-learning with gamification, etc. So my question, I think any one of you can pick it up, is technologies like VR and AR are expensive. They're pretty expensive, and sometimes they can be prohibitive as well. So what would you recommend to organizations, especially who are not large organizations, who may not be able to invest in those technologies? How can they still embrace gamification?
Yes. All you need to do, forget about the AR, VR part, because, eventually even that will be accessible, so we don't have to get there. But, as a learning professional, we need to ensure that has enough complexity and it is simulating the real scenarios. So for example, if you're teaching business acumen for your leaders, right? Now, you can run through PPTs, you can give them case studies and ask them, tell them what is a cash flow is, what is an income statement is, what is an EBITDA is and all that. But you create a nice board game. It need not be an online game also. A simple board game that the group will come together and play on their tables, and you keep increasing the complexity in that game. For example, you tell them, I'm giving you $100,000 when you're starting the business. And then, there's a banker who's standing there when you're not doing well, who says, you know what, at a very less percentage, I'm going to give you $200,000. Do you want to pick it, So the decision making points that these people are going to take. So the way you simulate the real life scenarios will help them connect the skills that you're trying to teach them back to work, and the applicability rate will also be high, So they'll go back and apply it because they actually are doing what you're expecting them to do, through the game, and that there will be enough energy and competition that you create. So it can be as simple as a board game also. So we need not think that gamification means that I should invest in developers, I should have an online simulation game. All that is fine. That option is also there, but it can be a simple board game. But the point is there enough reality that you're bringing into the game? Is there enough real life situations that you're bringing into the game? And is there enough complexity that you're creating that will tickle the brain of the learner to think and do something more?
Fantastic. So I think this is good news for all of us. So it's our objective, is our purpose that decides what the solution should be. It's not necessarily the solution driving our purpose. So I think this reminds me of this interesting anecdote. When Americans went to the space, they realized because of low pressure or no pressure, the pen, the ink in the pen kind of freezes, and then the pen doesn't write in the space. So the scientifically advanced country they decided to invent a pen which can write in the space, and they did that. They spent millions of dollars, invented a pen which could write in the space. And do you know what the Russians did? They used a pencil. So it's your purpose. Your purpose is to write in the space. So you can choose what technology that you need to use. Interesting conversation. So Rajesh, when you talk about gamification, talk about investments, etc. So do you really get into these conversations about ROI and then effectiveness? What are the success metrics, etc.?
Indeed, I think, personally, if you ask me, I'm not a big fan of ROI. Teaching is so precious, and if you want to measure everything in terms of dollars, which is my business actually, and I do it, but as a person, I'm against it, because I think Deepa mentioned this. There is a child in us, and if you're trying to awaken this child and want to put a level playing field where you really want to wake up this child and make him or her smell the coffee, approach of ROI is less impactful. What is more impactful is the application part of the learning that this child or adult child is going through. So for me, effectiveness comes first than the return on investment. And to add to the effectiveness aspect that you asked about, I think there are very many ways that we can experiment when it comes to gamification. I think one of the aspects that both my colleagues talked about from the lenses of gamification is not I really want to cover. I also want to cover few of the things that I'm currently doing in order to enhance the effectiveness while gamification becomes the rule of the game. I work with a company called Vervago, which teaches precise communication. It's mostly digital responses for any question that you ask. For example, if they ask me, are you going to tape this out by work week 41? My expected answer is yes, no, I don't know, or sometimes I use some digits. So surfacing the unknowns pretty early in the conversation is the goal of this company, and that has enabled many of my counterparts, my associates, and my colleagues to be very precise. Why I'm bringing this precision aspect is to tell you something that I saw on 15th of August. I think on one of the Twitter accounts, I saw one of the Indian poor kids on the what do you call the one that separates two roads?
The
Divider. So this boy is sitting on a divider with the plastic flags in his hands, and the caption goes, "I wish it is patriotism, not his hunger, makes this boy sells this." Precise, captivating story. I think effectiveness of gamification lies in precision as to how you create the desired impact, desired effect. Job aids that we talked about, then we talked about micro-learning. One of the key things that I discovered in order to enhance the effectiveness in gamification is how do I be short and precise, still send a very strong message. And if you really deduce this and apply it to complex learning that occurs in most of our engineering organizations, is that engineering inherently is very complex and often turns out to be boring. How do you create micro videos? How do you create micro learning and still end up sending these precise and powerful messages, like the story that I talked about, this poor kid sitting on the divider, is a game changer. And the early that we recognize as practitioners, better justice that we would do with the investments that our organization make. So the return on investment largely lies in our hands than the consumption. That's my version.
This is brilliant. It's not the ROI, it's the impact that we create. Deepa, you talked about the evolution. You said the leaderboards are no longer interesting for people. You talked about the AR and VR. What trends that you were seeing? How is this gamification going to evolve in future?
Yeah. So definitely the virtual VR piece is going to come in. The affordability part, maybe some disruption will happen. Technology is disrupting things very quickly nowadays. So I'm sure the affordability part will be taken care. But a lot of virtual reality apps or those things are already in the market. So for example, if I had to teach cultural sensitivity to people, there are VR apps where they simulate a culturally diverse group interacting with each other. So you actually go into that group and you're actually doing simple things like, I want you to be part of this meeting, but how do you say that? And that app, it corrects you. You experience it, how that person responds to you and all that. So
you think these technologies will become commonplace?
Will become common. It's already setting in. Schools are using these kind of apps now to make the experience. See, virtual reality is all about teleporting you into that space, right? So, and I think people today in the experience economy, they appreciate experience, and this is a virtual experience, right? So that will be the trend to come. How we will catch up with that, that's something that we will get to know very soon, shortly.
Right. And with virtual reality, the learner is at the driver's seat.
Exactly.
He or she is driving his learning. If you're exploring moon, you decide which way to go.
Which
the
way
South
to
Pole
go?
or the
Yeah,
North Pole or wherever.
yeah, and you're also interacting with your other virtual friends, in the same space. So
Fantastic.
I think in the communication space, this is already setting in. In schools, they are using this for kids to understand history, explore historical places. Augmented reality is a big thing. Right. So these things will catch up. Maybe in India, it's just slowly setting in, but it will be there definitely for sure if we are talking 2025.
It's very positive development.
Yeah.
I would like to ask Dinesh, so you talked about the evolution and the journey of gamification in your organization. So did you really have to drive any management of change to get the leaders to embrace this and get the workforce to embrace this? Was there any management of change initiative that you had to run?
I would say yes, but not with a stick. So we had to try out different ways, and I think more than the communication was most critical here. And so generally, like I heard 60% are zombies, and that's where the target audience is for us to really wake them up. So again there we knew that traditional emails don't work. It's like it's just at least we almost everybody hate emails, and it has never worked and meant the purpose of communication. And in today's world, I think we have to just ban emails because it's not serving its purpose. So then we actually started to explore how do we really reach them out. And then I myself have experienced with my boss and some of the peers. I get quicker response if I message them on a WhatsApp or an SMS than on an email. So I thought, okay, let us try Yammer. And Yammer was a hit for us because as an enterprise, we have Yammer in our organization, and people have them on their mobiles. And again in Yammer, there were a lot of stories. Everybody starts channels, then they just die after 2 days, 3 days, or maybe a week or a couple of weeks. So then we strategized on how do we keep that channel active. So I actually challenged my team. So we had a channel which was at the organization level, where we used to get a lot of communication around buses, food, festival, celebration. So it's a very common topic. And I actually told my team that we have to come with a strategy where we should have our viewership competing with that channel. If we can make this as interesting as that channel, then I think we have met our actual objective of communication here. And that is where we reached out and started pumping out information, particularly when we started communicating about these new initiatives. We came out with micro-learning, gamification, and then we saw that there was a lot of collaboration over Yammer, and to our surprise, even people started contributing to it. So that has been, which has helped us to reach out to the audience and engage them. Unlike a regular change of just communicating, going around, putting posters, I think those are all now, it's like dinosaurs, it's not working. So this is where we actually tried out.
I really like the amount of experimentation you do.
Yeah.
I think that really drives learning. And building on this topic, Rajesh, I would ask this question to you. While we're talking about change, the leadership and organization accepting this change, is L&D ready? Do you see L&D practitioners and organizations are ready to, not just to drive this, but in the first place, are they ready to embrace this themselves?
I think they are, for they know that if we don't change, I think our iceberg is going to melt. If you go by John Cotter's theory of iceberg is melting, there is no point in living in a world where we accept things as they are and don't want to be provoked, don't want to be stimulated, don't want to be challenged when the world around us is changing. Given the fact that there is a tremendous amount of change that is also expected, that also people are expecting out of us. There is a newness that people want. Even if Apple is launching its latest phone, I think in the first 15 minutes people decide, is there an excitement in this or no excitement in that? And people make their buying decisions at a snap of a finger. So I believe every responsible L&D practitioner or a HR practitioner recognizes the fact that change is the need of an hour. If you remember that famous story of a frog being into cold water versus being into warm water, and that warm water renders a lot of coziness, a lot of warmth to this frog that doesn't realize that if I stay here for more time and if the water starts boiling, I will not be able to jump. I think all of us who also belong to old schools, right? I belong to old school. I have a son who went into an engineering college last year, and for me, he was the best customer because every time I was struggling to understand how millennials think, as I think I have more than 45-50% of my crowd today millennials, more than 1/3 of my community is new college grads, and you can imagine if I'm not changing, they will reject me mercilessly. We use something called NPS, the Net Promoter Score. I'm sure many of you are using it in your organization. outrightly people are sending some real harsh verbatim followed by detractor scores if they don't experience change. So I believe we recognize the significance of this change. It's very clear on the wall. If we don't, I think we're losing this race big time.
So are you saying that there's some early adopters and then others are catching up?
Indeed.
Okay.
Indeed.
Okay, okay. So I think that's an interesting observation. So organizations, some of them are early adopters, but the number is always very small. The rest of them are always in a catching up mode. Early adopters will always have a head start. They will move quicker than the rest and then definitely reap the benefits of being an early adopter. So before we move on to audience questions, if I have to ask each one of you, just in 2 sentences, if you have to share your key message to the audience, what would that be? Dinesh.
Don't get obsessed with the means, look for the outcome. So you have to keep looking at how to use them. It's just a tool, but you should not forget your objective.
Wonderful. Deepa?
Just be comfortable with change. Change is the way of life now, okay? And yes, as learning professionals, we do have these segments of people, zombies to, what is that other
Spark
one?
plugs.
Spark plugs. So you will be moving mountains, but just change is okay. Enjoy the change, and that's the way of life now.
Rajesh.
I think many a times we get caught up with these fads, blockchain, machine learning, design thinking, now gamification. Let's not force fit this. I think all these things are great. They are challenging us to change. Let's embrace them with a spirit to enjoy the journey, because destination doesn't need to be attached to a journey. Sometimes journey in itself is exhilarating, it's exemplary. And that's exactly what you and I as practitioners need to embrace. Outcome is guaranteed.
Well, that's a very, very, very positive note. And then that brings us to the last part of our session. I think that's, again, a gamified component in it. So I'm just looking for Nikhil, where he is. He has to lead us through this. Can somebody, yeah, Nizam, if you can help. So before he comes in, I think it's a very interesting conversation so far. We have talked about the journey of gamification in the industry, in our country, across the globe, in respective organizations. They talked about the strategy that they're adopting to promote gamification. They talked about the investments required. The panelists talked about the risks associated with gamification, things that we need to keep in mind. We talked about the ROI. We talked about the latest trends and how is gamification evolving. We talked about the success metrics. We talked about the readiness of L&D and how ready they are, what kind of mindset, tool set, and skill set shift they need to make to embrace and drive gamification. So great discussion. So we'll now move to the next part of this panel discussion, and Nikhil would lead us through that.